Let's talk about Keir Starmer and the main story of this morning. I put it down the schedule a little bit because I've been hearing it all day. I'm going to have a slightly different take on it. And that is, the Prime Minister announcing that as these peace talks happen, they're going on now between Russia and America in Saudi Arabia. Zelensky isn't there from Ukraine yet, although he's expected to turn up on Wednesday. So it looks as if the Russians will be involved, obviously. The Americans will be involved, and Ukraine. Brilliantly, the Americans and the Russians say, we don't want those useless EU leaders here. They never achieve anything, so they can't come. So that lot are having an emergency summit in Paris saying, why didn't they invite us? Because you're useless and you never achieve anything. You're exactly what America hates. Woke, prevaricating, weak leaders, and that's why you're not there. Anyway, Starmer has, of course, joined the losers in Paris, but he seems to be saying, I can be the bridge between Donald Trump and Europe. As I said earlier, Russell...
But what's the point? Who cares?
When J.D. Vance addressed all the EU leaders on Friday in Munich and basically said, you better get with the programme, you better stop your disgraceful assaults on free speech, on freedom of expression, otherwise your American friendship will be over. When he addressed European leaders, Keir Starmer said he wasn't personally there. John Heaney, our Defence Secretary, and David Lammy, the useless Foreign Secretary, they were there. What Starmer doesn't seem to realise is J.D. Vance was talking specifically at Britain.
Britain and Germany, those two.
Britain, yeah. At Britain. Never mind bloody Germany. Nobody cares about Germany. At Britain. At Britain. Starmer, he was pointing the finger at you. And yet Starmer seems to think he's Trump's best mate. Where did he get that from?
Yeah, it's a bit like, when you were at school and there was like the cool kids party that the nerds weren't invited to. The nerds went and had their own kind of, night bowling. Mm-hmm. And that is the EU and Keir Starmer, isn't it? They're the nerds that are just bowling on their own while everybody else is having a good time in a nightclub. Yes, I mean, look, Keir Starmer, we know from his first 7 or 8 months as Prime Minister, he's neglected Britain, ruined Britain. We know that in very, very many ways. But what he has been absolutely desperate to do, and this demonstrates it, is to be seen as a world statesman. The man that is on the world stage and can fix things. But as you say, Kev, the likes of Trump, Putin and others are just laughing at him because he is inconsequential on the world stage. He has absolutely no influence whatsoever, and look, he is going to be absolutely humiliated. He has begged Donald Trump for an audience in Washington. Trump actually, in public, in the White House, looked down the camera and said, words to the effect of, yeah, this guy keeps badgering me for a meeting. He wants it. He keeps ringing me. I mean, he is humiliating Keir Starmer without Keir Starmer realising he's being humiliated.
Here's another reason why, Keir's contention that he's like that with Trump, really close to Trump, is absolute claptrap. Donald Trump is revisited an old campaign of his from his last presidency, which is the European nations must start stumping up their fair share on defence spending in order to be a member of NATO. They're supposed to spend 5% of their GDP. None of them do. None of them do. Britain spends 2.3%. We're one of the better performers. France and Germany way below us. Now, in fairness, America only spends 3.38% of their GDP on defence. So when Trump says, everybody's got to spend 5%, he better get his own house in order as well. So what we're talking about here, as in all things, particularly with Donald Trump, is transactional. There's a deal to be made here. But right now, Starmer's saying, oh, well, I'm on the right side of him. No. What Trump is saying to Britain is, you've got to spend 5% of your GDP on defence. Otherwise, I don't want to know about you as a member of NATO. What are we saying effectively? What is Trump saying, or rather Starmer saying effectively? Oh, well, we spend 2.3%, and we are sort of trying to get it to 2.5%. So Starmer's not even trying to meet Trump in the middle. He's got a vague promise he's going to try and get it up to 2.5%, which is at least at least an entire percent, probably more, less than Trump wants it to be. So again, you can't go around saying, oh, me and America, we're very close, when he is trampling over what Donald Trump requires of him for our defence spending. It's another kind of, it's a weird situation.
And the game of chess on defence is being played here. We are already losing. So Pete Hegseth, who is the US Defence Secretary, went to Munich on stage, and as part of his humiliation of, where he and J.D. Vance humiliation of European leaders, Pete Hegseth said very, very clearly that Donald Trump, the President of the United States, and I expect this 5% of GDP contribution. Or, you know, of course, they've threatened to leave NATO on the basis that if that doesn't happen, they don't want to be the crutch that holds the rest of NATO up. But then David Lammy, of course, predictably did a very, very silly thing on stage, trying to punch above his weight intellectually. He said publicly, we, as a government in Britain, are committed to 2.5% of GDP spending. Now, in the election campaign and since, what the Labour government have said is that they expect to get to 2.5% of GDP eventually, but they won't commit to when. So in other words, it's a completely empty promise. It means nothing.
Who cares anyway?
No, but the fact is now Lammy, no, it's not. But in baby steps, Lammy has now effectively committed himself to having to now increase that, presumably without telling Rachel Reeves, without telling Keir Starmer, because he wanted to big it up on stage. It's an absolute disaster.
Yeah, but
we're being played.
But it's the equivalent of you owe me 50 quid. And you know, I haven't paid you back for 8 months or something.
This might actually be true.
This is a true story. I've been waiting to get this out. No, it's the equivalent of you owe me 50 quid. You haven't paid me back for 6 months, and you turn around at me and say, "Hey, Kev, I've got great news. We could be best friends again because you know that 50 quid I owe you." You me go, "Yeah, Russell, I'm going to give you 2 quid of it back." You know, that's effectively what Starmer is saying in terms of our expenditure on our defence. Let's have a little look at Mr. Keir talking about sending troops to Ukraine. Another very bizarre development, but here comes Corporal Keir. Take it away.
We must continue to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position, whatever happens next, and to make sure that if there is peace, and we all want peace, that it is lasting. This isn't just about the front line in Ukraine, it's the front line of Europe and of the United Kingdom. It's about our national security, and I think that we need to do more. We need to step up in terms of our collective response in Europe. And by that I mean capability, by that I mean playing our full part when it comes to the defence of the sovereignty of Ukraine if there's a peace agreement, and of course when it comes to funding and training.
So he's, in that statement, what he's doing, he's committing Britain to sending boots on the ground, military boots on the ground, to keep a peace in Ukraine. Half the time, that basically means to continue a war. So the chances are our boys will be in Ukraine fighting. But that notwithstanding, hasn't he noticed we haven't really got enough people or enough equipment to send our army to Ukraine, our armed forces, because he and previous governments have depleted our defence spending to such a ludicrously low level. Yeah. So we haven't got the numbers to do this. Again, he's living in fantasy land.
Our army wouldn't now fill a football stadium. I mean, that's how bad it is. I mean, we would not be able to fill a football stadium in the Championship, let alone the Premier League, with our army. But the other thing I think is a bit silly of Keir Starmer in terms of his lack of judgment, trying to be kind here, is that as we enter a very, very delicate time where you're now going to have Ukraine, Russia and the United States trying to negotiate peace in Ukraine, you then get Keir Starmer lumbering in like a bull in a china shop saying, oh, and by the way, if this doesn't get resolved, blah, 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 I'm going to put boots on the ground in the Ukraine. What sort of response do we think we should elicit, we might elicit from Vladimir Putin? Because he is a bit like Trump. He's not a man that's kind of known for his humility, is he, Putin? I would imagine that has not helped one little bit in the negotiations that are about to take place.
Yeah, naive again, but I think it's Starmer desperately trying to
irrelevant
to portray himself as being a figure who is centre stage. Well, he's not, and ergo he hasn't been invited to Saudi Arabia. The only people in Saudi Arabia are negotiating about a Ukraine peace at the moment are Russia and America. On Wednesday, we understand Zelensky will turn up, and I think, you know, Trump and Vance and indeed Hegseth, the defence secretary, they're not stupid. They know that they've got to have Zelensky around the table to agree this deal, but they want nothing to do with European leaders, because well, what's it got to do with them? Really, what has it got to do with them? And we know as soon as they get involved, it'll be woke, weak and pathetic, and Trump knows that, Putin knows that, we all know that, so Zelensky knows that as well. So cutting out the EU leaders is a marvellous thing, and seeing them stage this emergency summit in Paris. Why weren't we invited? Because you're useless and pointless.